Wonderful. Looks like everyone's getting settled. Well, thank you for joining us today and welcome to our August Speaker Series webinar. My name is Ellie. I'm the Advocacy Coordinator at the Foundation. And before we begin, I would like to say a special thank you to our sponsors who help to put on this speaker series. Today, I am delighted to introduce to you our storytelling experts, Kristen and Sally, who are joining me from the communications agency Change for Balance. And before I pass it over to them to guide us through our storytelling webinar, just a reminder that you can submit any questions throughout this webinar using the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen. And Kristen and Sally will try to get to as many questions as we can for this next hour. But if your question does not get answered during this live session, you're more than welcome to reach out to advocacy@gbs-CIDP.org. I will include that email address in our chat function, and you will be able to get a response to your question there. So we can get started. Kristen and Sally, the mic is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. My name is Sally George, and I'm with Change for Balance. And we are delighted to take you through this workshop around storytelling. We are storytellers for a living, and we want to empower you to recognize that you are also a storyteller. In today's world, the story is probably the most important thing we have. There is just simply too much information out there in the world. And the best way to influence, to break through, to change behavior is through a well-told story. And every one of you has the license to lead and tell your story and to make tangible change within the foundation and advancing research, treatment, ultimately a cure for this cause. So we're here to help you. What we want to do is our hope is that you walk away from this workshop feeling far more confident in your own storytelling abilities. And at the same time, walking away with some real practical tips and tools so you can go back to the story about your experience and hone it, sharpen it, so that you can go. We know many of you go forth and share your story to impact the foundation and the work they're doing. And we want you to feel really good about doing that. As Ellie mentioned, we're going to have a little time. We want you to pipe in with questions in the chat. And then we'll hopefully have some time at the end, and we'll make ourselves available even after this workshop, should you want to send us a story that we could review and provide our input on. But we're going to dive right in, and I'm going to turn it over to Kristen, who's going to explain a little bit more about who we are, and then off we go.
Great. Thanks, Sal. So here's a little bit about our story. So Change for Balance, we are a strategic communications and production agency, and really our mission is to help change the world. We are, again, storytellers kind of by heart, but we are also health advocates, and we have worked in this space for many years. We're also really centered in disability. So many of our team members have a disability, are patient advocates. And so work like this is super personal for us. And I think that's one of the reasons why we were able to tell stories and think about how we craft them and kind of, use everything in our toolkit to push those out. So that's just a little bit about Change for Balance. There's a few of our team members there. And I don't know if Tiernan, can you advance to the next slide? There, great. This is a few of us, so you get a sense of who we are. And then if you go to the next slide, just to kind of start us from the beginning, why are stories so important? And I think the one thing we know is that they have this incredible power to influence. Steve Jobs has this wonderful quote. I think any of you who are Apple users or kind of followed the company over time, they have such a baked-in story into everything that they do. And it's part of the reason, they have a cult following, that there are so many of us that are, adhered to their devices on the daily basis. But they're the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation that is to come. And so we love that kind of starting point for how to think about our stories going forward.
Okay, so we're going to run through we're going to cover a few things today, and this is what we're going to learn is we're going to take you through story thinking so that We want to help you reframe the way you even look at stories, because oftentimes I think we're overwhelmed by the thought of telling a story. So we want to kind of reframe that for you to just help you simplify the whole process of thinking about it. And then the second piece is we're going to give you some brass tacks about how do you build it? How do you structure a story so that it really lands well? And then the last piece is delivery. You can write the best story ever, but if you don't have the delivery component worked out, then it falls flat. So we're going to cover all three, and hopefully by the end, you'll be ready to go. Okay, so let's start with story thinking. One of the things, especially when it comes to health organization, and as Kristen mentioned, we work with a lot of health organizations that are very heavy in research and data and scientific terms, and those are so very important. But a lot of times when we're telling a story, we tend to rely solely on the numbers because they're impressive, but they're oftentimes not super memorable. So that's why you're here today, because your powerful, humanized story is going to bring those numbers to life. So go ahead, Kristen, turn into the next slide. And here's why, is that there's scientific evidence that shows that if you look at a person's brain, when you're trying to influence behavior and you rely solely on data, you're only lighting up 2 areas of the brain. But if you tell a story, you are maxing out how somebody is really relating to what you're saying. Look at all the different areas of the brain that are actually lighting up when you are influencing both the rational and emotional sides of what's going on in their head. So here is an example of that. Let's do this first. Okay, so when you see this image, what do you see? I know most of you are muted, so maybe Kristen, you could tell me, what do you first see?
I see a vase.
I
like
see a vase, yes. Okay, so I see people. Well, what we want to do is when you tell a story using both data and your personal experience, you're allowing people to toggle from the left to the right side of the brain, and that is creating a fuller picture, and it's reducing confusion and bias, because most of us, whether we think we do or not, we come to data with a bias. And here's an example of that. So Febreze. Everybody knows Febreze. You might have it in your house. It's a very popular product. But when it was first introduced, it was not, to P&G's great dismay. So they had a team of chemists that were developing Febreze, and the marketing person who was leading it was a math-minded leader. That was his bent. So the chemists, when they develop it, they realized that Febreze really reduced any smelliness in a house. And so it was off the charts. All the signs showed you have pets, there's no stinkiness in your house whatsoever. And so the math-minded guy said, the data is clear, let's market it in that way. So they're all getting ready to get their bonuses and take a trip to Tahiti, and they launch Febreze, and it bombs. I mean, dead in the water bombs. And they want to understand why. So they start going into users' homes. They first go into a woman in a house who had 9 cats. They walk in and they're overwhelmed by the smell of cats in her home. She's a Febreze user. And they ask her, they're like, well, how are you using your Febreze? She's like, well, I don't really need it. I use it once a month. After I clean my house, I just use the Febreze. She had become accustomed to the smell of her cats, so she didn't think she needed Febreze. They then go to another user's home, a mom in her 30s, 3 kids, no pets, tidy, not overly tidy, but they watched how she used her Febreze, because she used her Febreze every day. She'd go in her kids' rooms, she'd make their bed, she'd fluff the pillows, she'd smile, and then she'd spray Febreze and she'd walk out. Febreze was a finishing spray. It was a reward. And so while the data suggested it reduced its smelliness, and that was the key for Febreze, the story became Febreze it's to make your house, it's to reaffirm to you that it's clean. It's a reward. And when they marketed it that way, Febreze, it's now $1 billion product. So you see that the data alone, it doesn't always tell the full story, but once you have the story, things change. So that is where you come into play. Data and story make a superpower together. So, Okay, so moving on. So how do we think in stories? One of the things that we do at Change for Balance, all of us do this, is we story bank. Is we are trained in journalism, and as part of that, we read the news. And so when looking at the news, we're collecting ideas on the regular on how we can use that to benefit our clients and all of that. So we collect news, and I personally have a Google Drive, a folder, and that folder is for story ideas. When I see things that might relate to my clients, or just these things that I think are interesting and creative, I keep them in a folder. Or if something happens in my life, or I'll write it down, or to our clients, I'll write it down and just keep it as a back pocket story that I can use, share, or piggyback on in regular life. So I encourage you to do that. Sometimes we think that these huge, big stories in life with lots of twists and turns and ups and downs are going to be the ones that are most worthy of talking about. But I want you to look at life like Seinfeld. Seinfeld was a sitcom that everybody said was virtually about nothing, but yet it captured America's heart because it found a common thread that every single one of us can relate to in the dailiness of life. And that's exactly what your story can do. It is the dailiness of how you're experiencing GBS-CIDP, that as a mom, as a coworker, as a neighbor, that people who maybe don't have the same condition as you can relate to, because it's part of the dailiness of life. So think small when it comes to stories. Think small and capture those details of something interesting. And so I want to give you some specific ideas of what might trigger some story thinking and story banking moments. Here they are. So you're always looking for moments every day when you realized you were wrong. That might be something you could capture. Where you raised your voice, where you helped someone, where you laughed so hard. So you're seeing there's just kind of some emotional shifts. When you were relieved of an unexpected surprise, of hard work, where you were embarrassed, a moment you wish you could keep forever, a moment you'd rather forget, where you overcame a challenge, where you experienced hope. So that's those are just some kind of trigger statements that hopefully when you're, if you're at a doctor's appointment, if you're just doing something in daily life, you can capture it. There was an emotional shift that was worthy of banking that moment in your little Google Doc or wherever you like to keep it, a journal. Okay. All right. So here's another exercise that is super fun just to use at the dinner table. But could also help you craft a story. In fact, we've done several of these workshops, and this particular exercise has really helped people shape how they want to tell their health story. So it's first, last, best, worst. And right here we have in the middle an example of a car. You could put anything in the middle of this story. And we would love for you to put your own journey, your own health journey in the middle there. Or maybe it's a doctor, as your interaction with a physician. So first, last, best, worst, car. I'm going to have Kristen walk through this. We all have an example of our first, last, best, worst car, and it's something that can connect us.
So, so the way you approach it is think about, okay, what was my first car? So my first car was by far my best and most lasting car. It was a 1978 Ford Fairlane, and it was a car that I drove actually because I worked in high school at a flower shop. And so I delivered flowers in this very old, kind of beat up car, and that was my first. My last car was a very boring, very predictable Subaru Outback. My best car has been my very reliable, very boring, very predictable Subaru Outback. And my worst car was actually my first car, and it's because of that Ford Fairmont. So there's one thing that forever has changed my memories of this car. It had two things that were awesome. It had air conditioning when most of the cars did not. It also had a cassette player, so it played music. Most of the cars we drove did not, but there was one hitch that made it really the worst, and that was that it played one song only, one level of volume. You couldn't turn it off, you couldn't turn it back on. And so it was, if for those of you who were raised in the 80s and the 90s, it was Steve Winwood's Don't You Know What the Night Can Do. So this song played over and over and over in my head for probably 2 years of high school as I drove around delivering flowers. And so I will never, ever forget my first car, the Ford Fairlane, and Steve Winwood's Don't You Know What Then I Can Do.
Awesome. So I mentioned that others have used parts of this. So an example is, I think it's actually someone from this foundation that they use just first and last for their treatment. Their first being treated for MMN, it took a long time to get diagnosed, and there was a lot of misdiagnosis compared to the last moment, and how their treatment has evolved over time, and their symptoms have evolved. So that was an interesting way to talk about the journey. And so you don't have to use all four, but it could be a good exercise just for you to go through to figure out how to kind of package up your story in a journeying way. Okay, moving to the next slide. Okay.
So then we move from thinking to listening. And I think one of the best things about really incredible storytellers is that they really are thinking about their audience. And so I'm sure you've heard that before. It's like, know your audience, know who you're speaking to, know who you're working to connect with. And so really that guidance and thinking about, who are you sharing your stories with? Will you be going to the Hill with GBS? Will you be doing a Zoom call of other new patients like you? Will you be sharing it, in a written story that GBS will be sharing, over their email channels or their blog? But it starts with, who is it that you want to reach? Who do you want to connect with? And really put yourself kind of in their shoes. So on the next slide, we have just an example of how to kind of think about this. And so when you think about, oftentimes these people that you're connecting with or meeting or sharing your story with, you actually don't know them personally. But how do you start to make some pretty good assumptions about who they are, where they come from, where there may be some layers of kind of overlap on your shared interest or your life journey? And this is just a good way to get you thinking and kind of prepare for when you're about to share your story. So thinking about, the person's name, age, location, where are they from? What kind of responsibilities do they have in their job? What are they hoping to achieve that also kind of lines up with what you are too? What are they motivated by? What's their, scope kind of on a daily basis where they're trying to, change the world or even just get through the day? Are there problems or challenges that you can assume line up within their area of business or focus? I mean, think about often where they may get their information. So in this case, we have someone who may be an FDA leader. And so they're likely going to medical journals or possibly The Hill or Politico, Washington Post. They may be getting information from those places. And then really at the end, what's their objective? What helps them be successful? And what is it that you can share with them that will help them get there? So really, thinking about, who your audience is, what's in it for them within what you're sharing. And then also thinking about what is it that they can help with? How can they support you? Why and how will your story inspire them to kind of come along on your journey?
And I think another piece too is that many of you might be telling your stories locally to local leaders, and that it's a great way to think about what is that local connection, because the more you can localize things, that also helps in reaching your audience. Okay. So this picture says it all. And I mentioned that there is just the world, we're all drinking out of the fire hose. There's just too much information. And just in the time that our team has been in the communications field, we have seen just a dramatic decrease in attention spans. The research has shown that it used to be that people could tolerate about their attention span was around 30 seconds. So you could read a paragraph in a newspaper and you'd be good to go. Now we have a shorter attention span than a goldfish. It's like 8 or 9 seconds. So we have to keep things very, very simple and succinct to grab people's attention. And there's a great way to do that with this story. That's why we want you to build it and structure your story in a way so you are you're organized, and you package it up really well, and you get what you want to say out in a short amount of time. This is a format that we are going to encourage you to use, and we can send this out after the fact. We actually write inside this house. It's called a message house. And we've used it for years, and we are encouraging you to write your story messages, not your manuscript, but your top line messages in this house. And this is something that you could actually carry with you into a meeting or in the car before you go into the meeting, that you have as a snapshot of what you want to say and the story you want to tell. So I'm going to walk through it, and then we're going to build it out as we walk through this workshop. So the roof of your story is the most important thing. It is the core message that you want to convey. So what is it that you're going in there to ultimately to say? Is it that you that we want better diagnoses, what is the key message that you want to convey in this story? And then you're going to support that through your own personal story, and you're going to take us through a journey that's going to bring us up and down on emotions, we're going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like, and then evoke our senses. You're going to paint a picture for us so it's memorable and we can't stop thinking about it when you walk out the door. And then the last piece, the foundation, is the data. The data simply supports all of the things that you're saying. So you can pepper it in, but it is by no means the heart of what you're saying. It's a supporting element that reinforces your story. And the little chimney at the top is your call to action. You never want to leave a story, especially in the work that you're doing for the foundation, without asking someone to do something. You have just communicated something very vulnerable, authentic, and compelling. Now you have an opportunity to bring them along. They want to join you. They want to support you. So you have to have a specific call to action at the end of your story to engage them to continue alongside you. All right, so we're going to walk through each element of the message house. And the first is the core message, which we talked about as defining the need, conflict, or problem you want to address. And you want to start there in building out your story. And we have a little video clip that we want to share with you that captures kind of what that means.
Let's say a man walks into a bar and takes a seat next to you. You start to wonder, who is this guy? What's his story? You form your opinion based on his looks and body language, and before long, you convince yourself that he's a CIA operative, tragic yet compelling past. It's something about his eyes. What is the lesson here? Without delivering a core message.
Sorry about that. I just think, Sally, if you mute, oh, you are muted.
Let's say a man walks into a bar and takes a seat next to you. You start to wonder, who is this guy? What's his story? You form your opinion based on his looks and body language, and before long, you've convinced yourself that he's a CIA operative with a tragic yet compelling past. It's something about his eyes. What is the lesson here? Without delivering a core message, people will fill in the blanks. It's imperative that you communicate simply and clearly why you exist and the difference you make. Now let's go back to the bar for a minute. You and the mystery man begin talking. His name is Pascal. Well, I'm a city planner working on zoning rules and permits, blah, 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 blah. And at this point, your eyes have glazed over and you are frantically searching for an exit. But what if instead Pascal said, well, I work as a city planner, and what I love to do is find ways to make our city more livable and healthy. Suddenly, Pascal seems more interesting. I work with developers to create green spaces throughout the city so families can walk to parks wherever they live, and we have found that this increases a sense of community. He's told you the need, why he exists, and the results of his work, and he's left you wanting to know more. So, how can your cause have a message like Pascal? Do you use your mission statement? No. Facts and figures? It's boring reading that. Use jargon? No. Instead, what you want to do is focus on people, tell a story, highlight benefits and results, and keep it simple.
Okay, so you saw that Pascal, his message was received because he had that core message, I make cities more livable and healthy. And then he supported it with some stories on how he was doing that. So that's what we hope you can do, is find that umbrella of what you're trying to say and then build your storyline underneath it.
They left us with the idea of keeping it simple. And sometimes simple's harder than it should be, but I think there's a lot of kind of power behind it and value and being able to kind of tighten up your message and your story in a really concise way. So there is something called the 6-word story. So I'm not sure if any of you have heard of this before, or if for some of you, maybe English literature, former majors or, fiction lovers, if you recognize the first, which is credited as the very first 6-word story and perhaps who wrote it. So it is For Sale, Baby Shoes Never Worn. And so that was Ernest Hemingway years ago. And the idea behind this is that you have sort of the conflict, the character, the narrative, and a little, suspense, all within a short amount of actual language. And so that's one that really has a beginning, middle, and an end right in 6 words. And so I think a fun challenge and something you can play with, and if you have some time and when you start to kind of lay out your own story, think about what your 6-word story would be. The second one here, the Married the Wrong Guy Fixed It, was one we found just in some quick researching, and I just love it because it says so much in its brevity. And then the last one is actually from the National Park Service. So if any of you follow them on Instagram, or they're really quite humorous, and they have a wonderful way with words. And so I love this, their 6-word story about mountains like flat land, but angled. And it's fun. It says a lot. It talks about, their mission, and says a lot in kind of a simple format. So simplicity is sometimes hard to get to, but I think it also can be a really good place to start in thinking about your own personal journey. And so I challenge you to give it a whirl and see if you can kind of pull down your message into 6 words and to have a little fun with it. It also helps kind of pack in your own memory so you can pull it up more quickly and, incorporate it into, your daily engagements with people.
Okay, so once you've kind of established that core message, then you start telling your story. And one thing that we want you to kind of consider is that your story should have some emotional range. And here's an example of a story with emotional range. It's a very familiar format. A Disney story is going to have, it starts out tough. There's adversity, they overcome adversity, they live happily ever after. Now, this is not everybody's story at all, but it shows you that there is not a straight line. There is going to be some emotional range. And so when you're looking at your story, we want you to kind of do something similar. And so if you go to the next slide, we'll show you how what this might look like for you. So this is someone from the GBS Foundation, of volunteer, Brenda. And Brenda tells her story, and you can see there's emotional range. So she is at a cocktail party. She's going to go meet her husband. She's walking through the hotel lobby in her stiletto heels and her fancy dress, and she loses sensation in her legs, and she does a swan dive and falls. And that is the beginning of her story. It's this inciting event where she knows something is dramatically wrong, and it's this word picture that you can't forget. She then has this uncertain period of time where they're trying to figure out what's going on with her. Is it LAS? What's going to happen with her future and her children and being a mom and all of those things? And so you're with Brenda along the way. And then at a certain point, they discover it's MMN, and it's still this roller coaster of emotion. She's frustrated. It's very hard, but that's where she interacts with the foundation, and she begins to get some help and find a community of like-mindedness that can support her. And then now she is on top of treatments. She's got her ups and downs, but she's stronger now, and she is very involved, has great purpose and great hope in the future and the way forward. Now, I do want to say that this looks like it ends with a very happy ending, and I want to be very realistic that not every story is going to have a big smiley face at the end of it in your current state, and that is perfectly, perfectly fine. We want to be honest and real and recognize that it might be a new normal that is still full of many challenges, but what we really want to express here is that there is a range that you're going to be experiencing. You want to show that range because that's what helps keep people sticking with your story and engaged along the way. Okay, so this is about call to action, about prompting a response. I think that oatmeal, everybody knows Quaker oatmeal, and this was a client we had worked on many, many years ago, and oatmeal was selling, but it wasn't selling off the shelves. And they had found there's plenty of research that showed that people were reducing their cholesterol. There's science that showed that you could reduce your cholesterol by eating oatmeal. And that had been listed on the package for years. The FDA had proclaimed that. But it wasn't selling oatmeal like crazy. So we developed this program called the Smart Heart Challenge, where we went into a little town in Connecticut and then one in California, and we put 100 people on an oatmeal diet, and they ate it for 30 days. And all these people started, like, they had super high cholesterol, and after 30 days, their cholesterol went down a significant amount. And they started telling their stories. They were like on the packages of oatmeal, like Wheaties. And oatmeal went off the shelves because now the data, again, it's sort of like the Febreze story, where the data was supported by a story which prompted a response. So people believed, because of your story, people are more apt to actually behave differently. So you want to have an action. This one was go buy oatmeal in an effort to reduce your cholesterol. Eat oatmeal every day for breakfast. So think about what that response is going to be for you. And it's an important thing to add to the end of your message. Okay, so then let's look at how people have done this with the message house. So we want to look at some of the pros out there who really, and gosh, if you're watching into the election stuff, you're going to see that there's such a formula to this. You will start recognizing, you'll see this message house in action. Anyone who has been media trained or story trained, they use this house. They really do. And Katie Couric is a perfect example of this. She was unfortunately recently diagnosed with breast cancer. She is fine. She caught it early, but she went on a media tour. And her media tour, the whole message was, her core message was early detection saves lives. And she wanted that message to become loud and clear because, you know, her husband, her first husband had passed away of colon cancer, and there's a family history in her family line of cancer. And because of COVID, she was off track on screenings. And so because of that, she didn't catch this breast cancer as early as she could have. But she talked about that whole scenario and then how it impacted her daughters. She went in and talked about how, when she told them, how that had impacted everybody. And then she went into details around her treatment. She used stats as she told the story, but her ultimate aim was to get that audience to know, yes, early detection saves lives, but go get screened for a mammogram. Go get screened for a mammogram. And she said that over and over and over again. Both of those messages, early detection saves lives, go get screened for a mammogram. So oftentimes your core message and your call to action are going to be repeated over and over again. So that's why those things are very important. But I challenge you, go watch, if you're watching the DNC, go watch some of that stuff. Go watch some of those speeches. Go listen to any of the news anchors on national networks, and you will see this message house in action and begin to craft your own that can mirror the pros. Mm-hmm. Here's an example of someone from another advocate in the foundation, Diana. She has had a long journey with CDP that has made her a resilient learner. And this is a story of relapse, is that we helped her with her opening. She was diagnosed, misdiagnosed really at 4.5, went to kindergarten in a wheelchair, and then suddenly experiences remission. But when she was 27, it all came back. And we talked about a little bit about how her life, she wasn't expecting it. She was a newlywed. She had these career hopes. She was very active, had plans for a family. And then all of a sudden, everything changed in her life. She was no longer able to walk without assistance, blow dry her hair without assistance, and had a lot of treatment ups and downs with allergic reactions to things. And then we get to a place where she's found this new normal, but she still is experiencing a lot of hardship with the symptoms and other disorders that have come about as a result of this. She's got a very full life. She's volunteering, but it doesn't come without hardship. So this story talks about how life changed quickly, and then her ask is, will you help me advance research? So it's a good way of recognizing she can show resilience and she can ask for people to help her in this long battle that she has been enduring. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on to practice to delivery. So once you have your message house developed, those are remember the top line messages, then we want you to get into a place where you're practicing actually telling the story, speaking the story. And so we have some tips for you on what that looks like. Okay, so here's your little message house. What we want you to do is once you've started here is we want you to actually write out every word you're going to say. It's very helpful to manuscript your story. You will not be taking that into any meeting with you, but it is good for a few reasons. Is that one, you want to time yourself. You want to see if you have any extra unnecessary words, if it's too long, and it's a good exercise to practice every single word you say. You start with the house, then you manuscript it. Write every little thing down. Okay, move to the next. And then once you've done that, you really want to focus on how you open. A good story kind of lives or dies by how you start. A lot of times we're nervous people when we have to speak in public, when we have to say something important. So we always instruct people when we're training people to really know your opening cold, memorize it, have it down. The things in the middle, you can really ad lib a little bit on those, and you can be, it's okay if you change your words a little bit there, but have this rote memorized. And here are a few ways that you can stand and open with real strength. So one way is you start with imagine if. So think about, imagine being thirsty all the time, but never having anything to drink. So that's an example of something that we take for granted, but wow, if we didn't have that, how would we feel? And I know that some of you in your own experience with GBS-CIDP or MMN probably have something you're struggling with that other people would take for granted that they can do every single day. So imagine that would be a real jarring way to start. A dramatic question, how has CDP changed the way I live my life? So you start that to be able to really frame the rest of your story is you answer that question. So then you can really package up your messages in a way that answers. You could start with a jarring event or a quote, like I told you about Brenda, how Brenda, just falling in on her way to a cocktail party is a real jarring start to what she's doing, to her story. And then if you're funny, and only if you're naturally funny, use humor. Everybody loves something humorous, but you don't need to, if it doesn't come naturally for you, no need to try it. Okay, so then you're going to look at your manuscript. Once you have your opening locked down, you want to look at the messages that you have for your story and make sure that that the stories are vivid, that you're telling something that almost transports us into a different place. So Brenda, again, I'm going back to Brenda. She transported us into the hotel lobby when she tells her story. If your story is in a doctor's office, if it's at home getting ready for the day, whatever it is, take us there. Describe it. What are you wearing? What are you doing? How are you feeling? So that we can be there alongside of you. And a good way to do this is to use present tense. I'm walking into the hotel lobby. And I got my beautiful dress on and my 3-inch high heels. I've never felt so good. When all of a sudden I feel my legs are tingling, that is a way to do it. So you are there with her in that moment. So take those stories and transport us, make them come to life in the environment and in the emotion that you're feeling in that environment.
Yep, you really set the scene. I think brands, again, we're always looking for really good examples as they happen in our world. And so this is a little audience participation part where we kind of see if we can guess the brand. These are all elements of these certain brand stories. So I know most of you are on mute, but if you want to drop things into the chat, have at. Otherwise, we'll kind of go through this. But here's our first brand. So just with these few elements of their story, having a magical day, a mouse house, kingdom, Imagineers, cast members. I'm guessing most of you can figure out which brand this is. And of course, give you, oh, the chat's disabled. Oh, sorry, the chat's disabled. So go on into the Q&A if you want to do that. And give us just a moment. Yes, Christina. Disney, Disney. I know it's something that, I mean, we all, I think, have that visceral experience with them because they are master storytellers, of course. But that is part of why we have such an emotional connection with that brand. And we instantly know who it is without any mention of the actual name. So let's go to the next one. This is our second in the series of Can You Guess It? This one's a little harder, but thinking about co-op, opt outside, purpose before profits, mountains, outdoor, members, gear. Any of those sort of ring true for you? Do you want to give a few hints at what brand this might be? Good. Okay, Leah says Patagonia or REI. Yes, it's actually REI. Patagonia, very similar to, I think the one addition for Patagonia I'd put in there would be climate as well. But yeah, but again, they've kind of built this community and this story around it, a little bit of lore to build it. All right, okay, we've got one more here. So you think about your own story and your own stories with the foundation, you know, and we want to start to build some shared language that all of you can use and use sort of in unison to really bring your experience to life across MMN, CIDP, whatnot. What are those words that are really your power words that start to bring to life your shared experience? So here's some that we've pulled up about you that we think is very true as we get to learn your organization. And again, if some of you want to drop some of your own words into the Q&A, but you know, courage, change, isolating, community, uncertainty, I think is a big one. Pins and needles, that tingling, you know, misdiagnosis, rare until it happens to you. I think that's one we've heard a lot from many people in your community. Relapse. So you have these words that are strong, and that as we start to use them, you know, more collectively, it does start to paint a picture of your experience and your organization. Family pressure, absolutely. Any others?
Well, and still unanswered questions about future and diagnosis.
We'll add that in.
Very good. Thank you for sharing. There was a question at the top too about the length of a story and how long should your story be? Generally, your story around 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes is about. It really depends on the situation, but around 3 minutes is probably a good number on telling your story. So try to keep it within that range. Now you may be in a situation where there's more of a Q&A format, and so that might be a little bit different. And in that case, if it is a little more of a Q&A where you're able to tell your story in a more of a conversational format, the message house is a beautiful gift because you will not stray from what you're wanting to say because you have your core message and then you have your supporting messages and supporting stories that tie back to your core message, and you won't lose track. But I try to keep it when you're doing your manuscript, try to keep it within 3. I think that's a good amount of time to be able to convey your own experience. Okay. All right, so you've landed your opening. You've memorized the opening. It's compelling. I'm hooked. You've transported us into this place. You're using these power words that are unifying words that all of us, we're all using the same words around the organization. And now you want to close it with strength. And so we talked about, remember one of the things we said at the very beginning was one of the ways you could start is, how has CIDP changed the way I live my life? You end it by asking the same question. So you're creating this through line and you're packaging up and you're leaving a satisfying close. You're finishing the thought. And so that's an easy way to do it with the question and then repeating the question at the very end again. You also could have, we talked about this, Katie Couric was a pro at doing this. You're linking your story together with your core message by repeating it over and over again. And that is a great way to finish with that core message, because it is something you want to leave everybody with. And then you move right into your call to action. All of these require the call to action at the end. But you want to close with either have bookends with the way you started it, you finish the same, or you can pepper your core message in and bring it home at the end as well. So those are some easy, tried and true tips that will make you sound like a polished speaker. Okay, now you've written this whole manuscript. It's probably 3 minutes, but you're going to time it, and you're going to edit it. Everybody needs to edit, and I think it's the hardest thing to do. It's easy to write, but man, editing is tough because everything seems so important. But you want to make sure that when you look at your story, that your core message is clear, and that the supporting stories to your core message are relating to your core message. They tie back, they ladder up. So make sure that happens. A lot of times we do organize things in threes, and I know it seems formulaic to some people, but there's a reason for it. Look at the phone number. The phone number is organized in 3 parts because that is the way the human mind works. We remember things well in threes. So while it may seem formulaic to you, people don't even notice that you're saying things in 3 messages. They just remember it. So don't feel like it won't feel formulaic. It's actually very memorable. And then when you are saying your messages, make sure you are specific with your examples. You're using your power words, and it's sometimes hard to have somebody else read your story or to say it in front of somebody else, but we encourage you to do that. Do it in front of a mirror. Just have somebody react to it. It's always good to do it. And they may point out some things that you need to cut or emphasize in the way that you're delivering it.
So we hear a lot now, and I think as you watch people who are really good at telling stories, the thing for me that stands out is when they're really being vulnerable and authentic, and you get to know a little piece of them. And I think, as patient advocates, as people who are going through something, deeply personal and incredibly challenging, it takes that extra confidence and sort of willingness to share your story. And that is absolutely not nothing. There's so much value behind that. And I think that is also your superpower, and why people will find you more trustworthy, more persuasive, and really, hear your story and put themselves in your shoes. And so one of the things that we talk about a lot is sort of helping each of you kind of uncover, who are you as an authentic storyteller? What is it about you? What are those strengths that you can pull on in sharing your story that are uniquely you? Sally mentioned earlier, if you don't have humor, you're not funny, don't go there. It's not something we can actually learn. But if you do have humor, you lead with it. So if you don't have humor, what are your options? What do you dig in, and how do you find those things about yourself? So one tool that we love, and we really practice at Change for Balance and with many of our clients, is something called the VIA Values in Action Character Strengths. And it's a survey. I think many of you have probably taken it. If not, go ahead and take it. You'll, I think, learn a lot about yourselves and others around you. And essentially, it is an academic study of what is right in all of us. Who are we at our very best? And in rank order, it will give you your strengths. And so when you take the survey, you'll come back with a 1 to 24. Which ones are your top strengths? Which ones are kind of in the middle? And then which ones are sort of, towards the lesser end? And essentially, who you are at your best, who makes you authentically yourself and uniquely you, are your top 5 strengths, give or take 3 to 8, somewhere in that top part. And when you're really drawing upon those and using those as you're sharing your story, as you're interacting with people, it's where you soar. It's where you sort of thrive in your storytelling nature. So understanding that about who you are also helps you kind of empower your stories and, dig into your curiosity if you're a really curious person, or if you're someone that is really high in hope, that makes sure those kinds of messages come through. I'm going to point Sally out because Sally is very low, and she will admit this in in beauty, appreciation of beauty and excellence. And so Sally, you'll tell the story about her son, who that happens to be his highest strength. And so in order to kind of connect and find ways to, build a stronger relationship with him, she's taking note of that and kind of, bringing those moments of seeing beauty or awe into her relationship with her son. So I think understanding your own strengths as who you are as a person will make you a better storyteller, more confident, more vulnerable, more real, and more compelling. I'll give you a few more examples. I already sort of threw Sally out there, but this is Ben Truckman. Ben Truckman is a member of the Change for Balance team. He has been a patient advocate for since I think 2010. He was in an accident when he was in high school and is a spinal cord injury survivor. He does a lot of speaking. He's a council member in his hometown of Evansville. And Ben is incredibly high in humor. He is also incredibly high in kindness and honesty. And so when you hear Ben speak, these are the tools he pulls through. You get to know that about him immediately through his storytelling. He opens up with something witty and funny, and he sort of makes everything approachable, breaks down the room from the get-go, and then really speaks to, his role as a leader in his community, sharing his perspective about a life as a patient advocate and someone who uses a wheelchair to navigate his world. And so he's one of our favorite storytellers for this reason. Thinking about Albert Einstein, are there certain strengths about him that kind of come to mind? So this is a skill that's called strength spotting. And so often you can do this in your peers if you're practicing with someone else, other patient advocates that you're interacting with. It's a nice way to sort of point out the high points in them. So if you're coaching someone on delivering messages, you can point these things out. So Tiernan, if you go to the next slide, we offer up a few examples of, who this man was, what some of his strengths were, and how that pulls through in how we know him. So love of learning, obviously off the charts, gratitude, curiosity, love, all of these things really speak true to him and help us understand who he is and know his story. And we had to pull in, for all of you Swiftie fans out there, what do you think about Taylor Swift? From what you know of her, where are some of those strengths, and how does that come through in her performance, in her music, in her, takeover of the global world, and for, young girls everywhere? What are some of those strengths that you really see pull through? And you'll start to see these in all of their storytelling, in their presence, humor, honesty, creativity off the charts, judgment, hope. So you start to see these aspects in others. And then we have one more, because we can't not honor the great Ted Lasso. So for those of you who have been fans of the show, he expresses his strengths to a bit of an excessive level, but they're very easy to spot. So if you go to the next one, here's a few of his, and you think about how he tells his story, who his character is, his gratitude, his love, his forgiveness, the perspective. It's part of why, we love the show and are connected to him as a character and a storyteller.
So someone had asked in the Q&A about using ChatGPT and could it do a lot of these functions? And I think there's definitely a place for ChatGPT in really helping you get a first draft. But I do think that it eliminates just what Kristen was talking about. It sounds like you're reading a cover letter sometimes. So I think don't lean into your personality, into the words that you use, your vernacular, the way that you talk, your tone, your cadence. Those are all your strengths. And so sometimes when we try to it sounds like you're reading a speech if it's not written in your own voice. So we encourage you to just lean into that, take the survey and recognize that those are the things that make you you and make you believable, because believability and relevance, those two things together are huge. That's what that causes behavior change. So please start with your own manuscript, jotting it down yourself, and maybe ChatGPT can help you fluff it a little, but use your own words.
Yep.
Okay, so pacing yourself. A lot of times people are going back one, are nervous about using ums and rights and okays because they're not sure what to say next when they're talking, when you're telling your story. Pauses are actually really good. So if you listen to professional speakers, one of them is Obama. It's President Obama. He has tons of pauses when he speaks, and it actually makes him sound very intelligent. And it also eliminates ums, ahs, rights, okays. So by all means, when you don't know what to say next, it's okay to have a pause. We encourage you to incorporate those into your speech, into your story. And then go ahead and set a timer and make sure you're not talking too fast, because we all do. I do, everyone does. And it's just good to look in the mirror, time yourself, and see your pacing. Okay, the last piece is presence. And a lot of us know this, but we want to reinforce that your body language really matters a lot when you're doing a face-to-face storytelling. You want to be mindful that you have good eye contact, that you're standing up straight, that your hands are open, you're not closed off like this, that you are just mindful of how you are presenting yourself, that your body is as engaged as your words. So it's just something to note that it has an enormous impact on how people receive your story. And in fact, there is this research that shows that there's this thing called the 2-minute power pose, where if you're nervous about speaking in public, and most people don't love doing it, before you go into that setting where you're going to tell a story, for 2 minutes, look in a mirror and it sounds ridiculous, but this person's from an Ivy League school and she's done a lot of research and she says this works. As you do a power pose, like a Wonder Woman pose or this or something, and you look in a mirror for 2 minutes and it's just, something strong. And that is going to reset your brain and your body for the moment of action. So just try it and see if that works for you, and get into just a powerful mindset before you go and tell your story. Okay, so here we are. You guys are already thinking in stories. It doesn't have to be anything big, the dailiness. You've now you've looked at your audience. You've now put your messages into a message house, turned it into a manuscript, and your manuscript should have power words, transport us. You've got your opening and closing, so you've really bookended it. And then you're practicing your delivery by using whatever unique strengths you might have, and we all have different strengths. Don't be afraid of the pause, practice the power poses, and say it out loud multiple times. By the time you get in there and you tell your story, you may know it by heart, and that's great. But for sure, know that beginning by heart so that you can do it strong. And if you have these things down, there is no doubt that you guys are going to go in there and influence and really compel people to act. And that's ultimately what we want to do, right? Is that you guys are change agents, and you are sacrificially giving your time and being vulnerable with your lived experience. And if you come in prepared, I have to believe that there is going to be some great impact that comes out of that. Okay, so, and this is just a reminder that oftentimes we think, okay, I'm just a regular Joe. Who am I to go in and go onto the Hill and talk to these very important people? You're very important, and you have a license to lead. They would not know about what it feels like, what the daily life is like, what your journey has been. And people need to know that. They need to understand this isn't a data point. This is a person. This is a lot of people. And so by all means, if you're not speaking up, who is going to do it? And so there's no one that understands this better than you. And we want to empower you to go in there with your story like the boss that you are and really help impact some change. I think it's amazing that you're doing what you're doing, that you've taken the time to want to hone your storytelling skills. And we are happy to help you continue to do that. If you want to use the message house and send it our way, we'd love to take a look and help you shape that. All right, so that concludes our storytelling workshop. And I'm not sure, Ellie, if we have time for questions. If there are any questions, is there a way for people to ask them?
It looks like we're all complete on questions. Everyone was using the Q&A box, which was great. But since we are out of time, I just wanted to thank you both, Kristen and Sally, for such an amazing presentation and sharing some of these great techniques. For everyone that joined us, thank you so much for your time and your attention, and keep an eye out for an email with a recording of this webinar and some of the resources that Kristen and Sally shared.